What happens when you combine tiny aquatic creatures, curious biology researchers,
I mean, we didn't go out looking for shockwave damping armor. It kind of found us.
and passionate engineers?
I never thought I'd work with shrimp. I work with, human traumatic brain injury.
At the University of South Carolina, you might just find the key to preventing blast-induced traumatic brain injury and PTSD. On the coast of South Carolina, among the marshy tidal pools and pluff mud, you may notice a pervasive sound, puncturing the sea breeze and distant rush of ocean waves.
I mean, it's like a bowl of Rice Krispies, like pop, 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 pop.
This snap, crackle, and pop is actually one of the loudest sounds in the ocean, made by some of its smallest inhabitants.
Snapping shrimp.
Snapping shrimp. Snapping shrimp.
Snapping shrimp are marine decapod crustaceans, so they're related to crabs and lobsters and crayfish, and they are they're their own group of decapods.
They're extremely aggressive. A lot of the study on snapping shrimp had centered around their use of shockwaves as weapons.
So they're called snapping shrimp because they have an elaborated snapping claw, and it creates a cavitation bubble.
Those are short-lived, they're very unstable, and when they collapse, they release a ton of energy.
It's an area of low pressure in seawater, which is higher pressure. And so it necessarily wants to collapse. And when it does, it releases a huge amount of energy.
It's a really intense compression and decompression of air.
And that's the same type of pressure wave that's released when, say, like a bomb detonates.
We're talking 60 miles per hour, 418 decibels louder than a speeding bullet, and heating the air up to 8,000 degrees Fahrenheit, 4 times hotter than lava.
They use the shockwaves as weapons. They use the snaps for a lot of different tasks. They'll use the sound component of the snap to communicate with each other too.
Snapping shrimp, also known as pistol shrimp, are commonly studied for this incredible behavior that the shrimp use for communication, competition, and hunting. But as fascinating as the snapping claws of these creatures are, Dan Speiser and Alex Kingston found themselves asking a different question.
And I was actually hired on here to do really the visual physiology of mollusks, which I did actually. We ended up landing on the snapping shrimp as an interesting group of animals.
How the eyes work, how they process visual information, how they use vision in their environments.
We got really interested in the relationship of that weapon, the snapping claw, to the armor that they have evolved.
For most decapods, so like shrimp and crabs, etc., their eyes are on stalks and kind of free to move. But in snapping shrimp, there's a sheet of exoskeleton that comes out from the carapace and covers their brain and their eyes. So their eyes are kind of tucked under the shield.
They have really, really fast sampling eyes, and that's a really odd thing for a crustacean to have. We don't really know why yet, so we're still working on those questions. But while we were working on those questions, we got really interested in this armor.
We started wondering how they were able to survive exposure to their own shockwaves and also to the shockwaves of other snapping shrimp.
Alphiidae, which is the family of snapping shrimp, has about 750 species. They're globally distributed, and you can find them in all coastal marine habitats. But there are really big populations of a few species on the East Coast, in particular Alpheus heterochelys. And luckily for the USC team, the Baruch Institute for Marine and Coastal Sciences has a very big, very healthy population.
We go out to the tidal creeks with nets and buckets and usually sturdy shoes, and we collect some of the oyster rubble, and the animals are living among the oyster rubble in makeshift burrows and little holes that they find to live in.
These shrimp are small, about half the size of your pinky finger. But like many things of small stature, they are feisty.
If you put two together that are kind of a similar size and not in the best of moods, they'll face off and they'll snap within like about a centimeter of each other's heads. So they'll just go head to head and get their blaster claws up. So it's a little bit like a hockey fight, kind of like claw to head and claw to head on the other one. we started to wonder, like, how do they survive this?
The key to this survival? Orbital hoods, or more colloquially, helmets, that cover the shrimp's eyes and brain, something that's unique to this species of shrimp.
The way the orbital hood works is you have that sheet of exoskeleton that's like coming out from like the carapace of the animal. It's covering the eyes and brain. Open at the anterior end. So if you've got like the little visor here, there's an opening, and then between the helmet and the eyes of the animal, there's a thin layer of water.
The Speiser lab theorized that when a shockwave hits the head of a snapping shrimp, the helmet would dampen the shockwave's effect, allowing the shrimp to go along like nothing had happened. To test this hypothesis, the lab would remove hoods from the shrimp.
We can do that without injury. They tend to molt after that, and then they do just fine. In many cases, they'll eventually regrow their orbital hood.
And expose them to shockwaves.
The main thing we tested in our experiments was their ability to find shelter. So snapping shrimp live in burrows, and if you put them in an unfamiliar place, they'll go for the closest burrow. And so we trained them to accept as little lengths of pipe as their home, put them in an unfamiliar surrounding after they've been exposed to shockwaves, and asked how long did it take them to get to the home. And we found that if you exposed shrimp to shockwaves when they had a hood, they behaved normally, and if you exposed them to shockwaves when they didn't have a hood, they were slower, they were disoriented, they had poor motor control. And so that's our sort of behavioral evidence that their helmets actually protect them from shockwaves. We don't know how they damn shockwaves, and that's where our work with the engineers here, with Ahmed and Tarek, comes in.
My name is Tarek Shazli. I am a professor of biomedical engineering.
My name is Ahmed Al-Sharif. I'm an assistant professor of biomedical engineering here in the Molinaroli College of Engineering and Computing.
My specialty is in the area of cardiovascular solid mechanics. My work naturally has a lot of mechanics and mechanics to materials connections embedded within it. And in the context of this current project with Dan and his group, it's also a mechanical problem.
I come from an injury biomechanics background where I study traumatic brain injuries, and one of those types of injuries is called blast brain injury. So we see these in military environments and such. And so my perception of what's happening in this helmet is that it's dissipating this shock wave as it's coming in, stopping the stresses arriving at the brain tissue of the shrimp, and therefore mitigating the injury that would happen otherwise.
So the way they work, the way the hoods and the helmets of these snapping shrimp work is really twofold.
The hypothesis about the helmets went something like this. First, the wave travels through the material of the orbital hood, which stretches and ripples, dissipating some of the energy throughout the material itself. But secondly, the movement of the hood also disrupts the layer of water that lies between the hood and the eyes and brain. This water shoots out from that space, taking a lot of that kinetic energy and redistributing it out into the surrounding sea. In a 1-2 punch, the shrimp significantly dissipates the energy from the shockwave before it reaches the eyes and brain. But to test this, Dr. Shazli and Dr. Al-Sharif needed to investigate the structure and material properties of the hood itself.
In my lab, we use computer simulations to say, let's put an incoming shockwave against this type of material and see how it's exactly dissipating that shockwave, through what mechanism. And so once we got our simulation to give us realistic biophilic answers, then we changed different things about that shrimp helmet. So we said, well, what if we changed it all the way from low stiffness, for example, to high stiffness to the average snapping shrimp, because everyone's different. We also said, what if the snapping shrimp had a different material property somewhere along their exoskeleton, somewhere else, but not covering their head? Would that cause the same amount of mitigation of that blast as others? So we came to a pretty cool conclusion there, that if you had something in the way versus no helmet, in this case, it did protect. It reduced some of the, those stressors that I was talking about in the brain by about 30 to 50%.
So to assess, the second part of that protective mechanism, the material-based aspect to the protection, it's really an issue of understanding the mechanical properties of the material itself. So the way you do that is you conduct an appropriate mechanical test and then process the data within the framework of some mechanical theory. In this case, we used viscoelastic theory.
Elasticity is the ability of a material to return to its original shape after being stretched or compressed. A rubber band, for example, has high elasticity, as it can be stretched and returned to its original shape many times, and even be stretched for a long time before changing its material property and losing its ability to bounce back all the way. To test the elasticity of the hood, we needed a special tool.
The mechanical tester is, the same type of mechanical tester that you use to assess the response of a wide range of soft or hard materials. In this case, what we did was a uniaxial test, which means that we fixated the helmet within this device and applied a tensile load, so essentially just stretched the object and held it at some fixed position and measured the force as a response over time. So this material has a viscoelastic component to it, which is like silly putty, which means that if you take it and extend it to some particular length, over time the mechanical response continues to emerge, right? So it does a process known as stress relaxation.
Stress relaxation allows a tissue, like the snapping shrimp hoods, to manage pressure caused by an external force like the shockwave. When we apply pressure to an elastic material like the rubber band, it holds the energy that is put into the system through the tension of the rubber band, and it snaps back into place when the pressure is released. There is no stress relaxation. A viscoelastic material like silly putty, however, will initially hold the energy caused by an increase in pressure. However, over time it will dissipate that energy by changing composition. This stress relaxation is thanks to its viscous or liquid-like properties.
Well, what we were hoping to see is that the material properties of the helmet differ from the remaining part of the exoskeleton of the animal. Specifically, more of a viscous component to the mechanical response, and that's exactly what we found.
The hypothesis was confirmed. The shrimp have effectively developed a mechanism to protect their eyes and brain from shockwaves through a specific material distinction between their body armor and head armor, and through the shape of the head armor itself. Protection from shockwaves is incredibly important to these snapping shrimp in their daily lives, but its potential importance to humans cannot be understated. We are just beginning to understand the threat shockwaves pose to our brains and our neurons.
If we're thinking about the big picture, one of the things that we're really interested in is no armor ever, no engineered armor, no biological armors, none of these armors can slow down shockwaves. We have military personnel that are being exposed to shockwaves from detonating devices and from, artillery fire and things like this. And it affects their brains. They don't have armor that slows that down and keeps that energy from entering their soft tissues.
It turns out that it is really dangerous for neural tissue. The axons of your neurons, so in your brain and elsewhere in your body, they don't like that stretching. And so what we see from that is long-term neural degeneration from shockwave exposure. So there's initial injuries from blast exposure, which often present observable symptoms, and there's a longer-term damage that really doesn't.
One of the things we could learn from our environment is how species protect themselves from certain shockwaves. That could inform composite material development. For example, Kevlar is a composite material, and that's used for armor and defense.
So if you think about Kevlar vests or bulletproof vests, the reason they work is because they, inherently contain the capacity for entropic energy dissipation. So when, a projectile comes into contact with a Kevlar vest, it's not absorbed as elastic energy. Instead, the vest has a fibril nature to it that, it changes its configuration, this entropic response that dissipates the energy. So when we now extend what we've learned, the lessons learned in our shrimp research to helmet design and human issues, the idea would be that we can, understand how that is occurring in these natural materials and replicate it with some sort of engineered materials that would then be part of helmet design.
Can we use this natural system that has found a way to do that to inform or provide some design principles for how we could potentially improve human-based armor systems, slow down those shockwaves, and hopefully prevent some of these traumatic brain injuries that we're seeing in military personnel, particularly folks that are exposed to things a lot and over long periods of time.
Through interdisciplinary research like this, the University of South Carolina is making waves, shockwaves, and working to make the world a safer place for all of us by listening to the smallest of us. We are Gamecocks. We are game changers.